Lesson 1. War Profiteering. From Waterloo bonds to modern defense stocks. In the 1800s, the Rothschild banking family became legendary for one thing: financing wars. During the Napoleonic Wars, they moved gold and sold government bonds to keep armies in the field. They helped Britain fund its war effort, and after Napoleon fell, they helped fund the peace. The popular story that Nathan Rothschild used secret news from the Battle of Waterloo to trick the entire London market in one day is exaggerated. But the core truth remains: when governments needed money for war, they went to bankers. If the country won, investors were repaid with interest. If the country lost, they still tried to pay to avoid collapse. Fast forward. Iraq, Afghanistan, companies like Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, and other defense giants saw revenue jump during long wars. Governments borrowed, issued bonds, and passed huge defense budgets. The pattern is old but simple. War creates debt. Debt creates interest. Interest creates fortunes. That is one of the oldest and shadiest ways people have gotten rich. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Lesson 2. Slavery, cotton, and the birth of modern capital. In the 1700s and 1800s, the Atlantic slave trade and plantation slavery were not side stories. They were the business model. On plantations in the American South, enslaved people grew cotton, tobacco, and sugar. They were not paid. Their bodies were the capital. Banks in London and New York financed plantations, ships, and traders. Enslaved people were listed as assets on balance sheets. Insurance companies wrote policies on human beings, so slave owners were compensated if people drowned at sea or died in transit. In the Caribbean and the Americas, plantation owners became extremely wealthy, while enslaved people died by the millions. Even in British India, the East India Company extracted wealth through taxes, forced crops, and trade monopolies, while famines like the Bengal famine of 1770 killed huge numbers of people. When slavery was abolished, the freed people received nothing, but many former owners received compensation. The money moved forward into railroads, factories, townhouses, and foundations. The labor was erased from the story, but the wealth stayed. Lesson 3. Standard Oil, monopoly as a wealth machine. In the late 1800s, John D. Rockefeller did not just sell oil, he controlled it. Standard Oil bought rivals, bullied refineries, and used secret railroad discounts, undercut anyone who tried to compete. If a rival company refused to sell, Standard could cut prices locally until that rival collapsed. If they finally gave up, Standard bought them cheaply. By 1904, Standard Oil controlled about 90% of oil refining in the United States. The Federal Commissioner of Corporations later concluded that this dominance came from unfair practices and abuse of pipeline and railroad control. Consumers had almost no real choice. Prices and supply were effectively set by one network. In 1911, the United States Supreme Court ordered Standard Oil to be broken up under antitrust law, but by then, Rockefeller was already one of the richest people in modern history. And here is the twist. When Standard was split, the pieces became separate giants like Exxon, Chevron, and others. Rockefeller's shares in all of them made him even richer. Monopoly had already done its job. Lesson 4. Colonial Rubber and the Congo Free State. In the late 1800s, King Leopold II of Belgium took personal control of a huge territory in Central Africa. He called it the Congo Free State. It was not free. At first, the project was failing financially, then the world discovered the inflatable rubber tire. Suddenly, natural rubber became extremely valuable. Leopold issued decrees that nationalized almost all land in the Congo. Villages were forced to collect wild rubber. The Force Publique, a colonial army, punished anyone who did not meet quotas. Hands were cut off, people were whipped, and villages were burned. Between 1891 and 1906, rubber exports exploded, and state revenues jumped from thousands to millions of francs. Leopold became enormously wealthy from this forced labor system. Millions of Congolese died from violence, disease, and overwork. It was one of the starkest examples of colonial wealth transfer in modern history. Lesson 5. Wall Street and the 2008 crash. In the mid-2000s, Wall Street packaged risky home loans into complex products called mortgage-backed securities and CDOs. Rating agencies stamped many of them as safe. Banks sold them to pension funds and investors around the world. One infamous case was Goldman Sachs's Abacus 2007 deal. The Securities and Exchange Commission later charged that Goldman misled investors by failing to disclose that a hedge fund helped choose the assets in the deal and was secretly betting they would fail. When the housing market collapsed, families lost homes, jobs, and savings, but some hedge funds and parts of Wall Street made money by shorting those same products. In 2010, Goldman Sachs agreed to pay a $550 million settlement to resolve the Abacus case without admitting or denying the allegations. At the same time, governments bailed out major banks to prevent total collapse. Ordinary people carried the long-term cost. Many large financial players survived, merged, and recovered. Some emerged richer. After the dust settled, a global crisis became a wealth transfer from the bottom to the top. Lesson 6. The Sacklers, Purdue Pharma and OxyContin. In the late 1990s, Purdue Pharma, owned by the Sackler family, began aggressively marketing OxyContin, a powerful opioid painkiller. Sales reps told doctors that the drug had a low risk of addiction and was safe for long-term pain. Prescriptions soared. Entire regions of the United States, especially Appalachia, were flooded with pills. Addiction and overdose deaths rose sharply. Purdue later pleaded guilty to federal charges related to its marketing and faced thousands of lawsuits, accusing it of fueling the opioid crisis. The Sacklers, whose wealth was estimated in the billions, became known for funding museums and universities. Their name appeared on galleries and wings, even as the crisis deepened. In recent years, museums and institutions have removed the Sackler name under public pressure. In 2025, Purdue and the Sacklers reached a proposed national settlement worth about $7.4 billion to help address the damage from the opioid crisis. But many critics say the family kept significant wealth compared to the scale of harm. Here, addiction itself became a revenue engine. Lesson 7. The Russian oligarchs and loans for shares. After the Soviet Union collapsed, Russia moved from state ownership to privatization. In the mid-1990s, a program called Loans for Shares let a handful of businessmen lend money to the government in exchange for temporary control of valuable state companies. When the government could not repay the loans, those shares, often in oil, gas, and metals companies, were auctioned off. Many auctions were structured so that the same insiders who provided the loans ended up buying the assets at extremely low prices. In a few years, a tiny group of men became billionaires. They gained control over resources that had once belonged to the entire Soviet population. Ordinary citizens got almost nothing. This is how the modern Russian oligarch class was born. Corruption, connections, and rigged privatization turned public wealth into private empires. Lesson 8. From robber barons to philanthropists, buying a better legacy after building fortunes in ruthless ways. Many wealthy families have tried to rewrite their story through philanthropy. John D. Rockefeller, whose Standard Oil practices were condemned as monopolistic and unfair, later became known for funding universities, medical research, and foundations. His name shifted from robber baron to generous benefactor. In recent years, the Sackler family used philanthropy too, donating to museums and galleries whose wings carried their name. Only after the opioid crisis and the lawsuits did public pressure grow to remove those names. Protesters dropped pill bottles in museum lobbies and demanded institutions stop taking Sackler money. Some museums agreed, but for decades before, their donations had already helped soften their public image. The pattern is clear. First, make money in ways that damage others. Then, spend a small fraction to shape how history remembers you. Control the story, control the legacy.